Good morning. How's everyone? Obviously, we're all still slightly asleep, maybe. Not everyone is like really awake. Thank you so much. That was an amazing, amazing speech. I also enjoyed a lot of your jokes. So thank you so much for that. Well, to start, financial viability. Let's just define financial viability to start, because not everyone is a financier or someone who's into economics or that kind of thing. So in general, financial viability is, if I can just give it a layman's term kind of thing, it's we're saying that this company is making enough money. You know, it's like the company's making enough money to basically cover its costs, grow, and make profit. This is what we need. This is what any company actually looks for. It needs financial viability. Now, why am I starting with a definition? That's so cliche. It reminds me of like middle school, you know, or like high school, when you'd get like an essay it's like about patriotism or something, and you start with, well, the Webster Dictionary defines patriotism as blah, 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 blah. But why am I starting like this? Because this is very important to us for our topic itself. Now, our topic is about strengthening the financial viability of a company through cost control. My name is Adham El Khorazaty. I work for Infinity Towers for Urban Development in Egypt. We have multiple projects. Some of these projects are here in Dubai. Some of these projects are in Cairo, and hopefully we will expand in the future. Now, that being said, let me ask you a very simple question, all right? So, to start with, what do you think is the most important formula in business? Of course, this isn't a fact, it's like my opinion, but it is, I think it is the most important formula. Does anyone? Sure, go ahead. Well, yeah, money, of course, but the formula itself is the formula that we all start with in business anywhere. Profit equals revenue minus cost. This is what we're all looking for, all right? So basically, this. Profit, this is what we need. Now, you want more profit. If you do want more profit, you have one of two options. You either increase revenue or decrease cost. Now, if we wanted to increase, what's easier? What do you think is easier? Decreasing costs, of course. But why not increasing revenue? Increasing revenue is difficult for a very, very specific reason. It's kind of like a, what came first, chicken or the egg thing? You want to increase revenue? You need to make more money. It's that simple. Why do you need more money? You want to increase revenue? You need to spend on marketing. You need more money. You want to increase revenue? You need to find a separate revenue stream. You need to do research. You need to buy property. You need to do a lot of different things. Of course, another way to increase revenue is to increase sales. But if anyone can just increase sales, we'd all be doing it and we'd all be millionaires, I guess. But decreasing costs is a lot more applicable to most of us, because costs mostly are dependent on very controllable factors. You have the data, you have the information, and you can set all of your KPIs and you can set all of your, we'll call them like benchmarks that you can work against. Now, let me just for a moment take you on a quick trip with me down, well, I'll say my memory lane. Now, how did I get into cost control? In 2013, I lived in the city of Jinan in China. I was doing my master's degree on project management, and in 2016, I had to present a thesis. Finding the topic for this thesis was actually very difficult, so I went back to my mentor, someone who's been in the engineering consultancy industry for over 30 years. And he gave me a piece of advice that was amazing for me. You want to do research? Do research on something that affects the industry right now. A problem that we have right now, this instant. And what I decided to do was, all right, it's time to go around and shop for ideas. I sent out 250 surveys Of course, that's not the largest number, but for someone as singular as I am, it did take a lot of work. Of these 250 surveys, I sent them out to CEOs in the industry, the engineering, of course, the construction, real estate industry, CEOs, academics, and engineers with a combined experience of I don't know how many years. It's so much. And overwhelmingly, out of 250 answers, 199 were about cost overrun in construction projects. That's me, in a Chinese suit and everything. It's pretty cool. So, here's the thing, this is all in Egypt. Like, I did look for this in Egypt, and it was kind of surprising. I don't know if you've heard, but Egypt's been doing construction for quite a bit of time. We have been doing this for quite a while, but it seems like controlling costs is a problem that transcends experience to a large extent. So let's actually get into this. Let's get into it. Now, before we continue, it's very important to make a very specific distinction. There's a difference between cost overrun and cost escalation, all right? Cost overrun basically means, well, you wanted to pay a specific amount, you want to spend a specific amount of money for this project, you planned for it, you ended up spending more at the time of completion. Of course, we're comparing against the budget. Now, as opposed to cost escalation is a different kind of thing. It's basically where the costs increase, but you expect it. For example, inflation. You take that into consideration when you're budgeting at the very beginning. So we're not talking about an escalating cost, we're talking about cost that goes over what you've planned. Now, during my research, I did find a bit of data that corroborated a lot of this information, and I thought it would be interesting to share with you guys. Now, in 1983, let's start all the way in the back, as far back as I can actually go at this point in time. But in 1983, Avatos actually, he concluded that the final cost of a project will usually exceed the initial budget by 10 to 20%. This is in 1983. Now, moving forward to 1987, we have Morris and Ho, which actually, they're pretty big in this industry. They've come to a point where they've summarized 40 different, actually a lot of different projects, like 40 different projects. And of the 40 different projects, 50% had cost overrun of approximately 40% to 200%. Imagine having a project that you've planned on actually spending like 100 million of whatever currency you're working on at that point in time. But like you have this kind of money, and instead of spending 100 million, you end up spending 300 million. That definitely cuts into all of your profits. Now, in 1997, 10 years later, Nevin Wright actually suggested that the right way to deal with this is to add 50% to every estimate and 50% to the first estimate of the project. Now, here's the thing. Is this doable? Yes, it is, but who are you? Are you the contractor? Are you bidding for this project? Or are you the developer? Are you the person that actually owns this project? If you're the contractor and you start adding 50% to every estimate, the cost of this project for you is going to be extremely inflated. Not a single developer is going to take you on. Everyone else will undercut you, all right? On the other side, if you're a developer and you do this, it just cuts into your cost. But this just explains how much cost overrun is a big problem in all of these projects. Now, 2003, Belloy and Price actually said that rather than it being an exception, it's become a norm in the construction industry that projects have cost overrun. So there is a trend starting 1983 to 2003. That's 20 years of information. Now, 2003 is 20 years ago. Where are we now? Well, I do have a lot of that information, but unfortunately it's very proprietary, so I will give you some of the information off the top of my head. Now, before becoming the head of cost control for Infinity Towers for urban development, I was an internal audit section head for Oroscom Construction, one of the biggest construction companies internationally, and technically the biggest construction company in Egypt. Of some of these projects, I was able to actually review a lot of them. A lot of these, especially national projects, tend to actually overshoot the budgets. You have a project, for example, like the Grand Egyptian Museum. It's an amazing project, but it's been under construction for quite a bit of time. These kind of things, it happens. You know what? Other than that, COVID hit all of us. I imagine, did anyone here have a project during COVID that did not go over the costs budgeted for it? Not a single person. You'd have to be He-Man, a Superman, to be able to do that and actually finish on time. So, let me give you a couple of examples, just to give you a general idea. So, all of these pieces of information, all of this data is published online. You can find it anywhere you want. So the British Library ended up spending 511 million pounds, which was 3 times the original budget. Next, sorry. The Portcullis Parliamentary House, 250 million pounds, 2 times the original budget. The guy's house, it's a hospital renovation kind of thing, all right? It's 152 million pounds, 2 times the original budget. The Scottish Parliament in Holyrood, 230 million pounds, and was expected to actually go, it was expected to go to 230 million at 2.6 times the original budget, which is a lot. This is a lot. We're talking about national projects, massive projects that end up going overboard. Massive projects taken over, constructed and contracted by big companies. This isn't a thing that just affects small companies. It's not something that just affects people with less experience. Even if you're experienced, this kind of thing will affect you. So, during my research, I was able to actually collect a lot of these factors into 28 factors that are controllable and uncontrollable that affect cost control. Of these 28 factors, I put them into 4 categories. Of these 4 categories, as you can see, there are 12 controllable factors in the management and technique segment. Now, because we don't really have a lot of time and cost control is the kind of thing that just takes ages and ages and ages, there's a lot of things you can do, there's a lot of pointers, there's a lot of techniques. I've decided to focus on some of the 12 controllable management and technique factors, just to kind of stick to what's tried and tested, and so I can actually give you some little pointers. Now, we're going to talk about 6 of the 12 factors. Of the 12 factors, we're going to deal with project technical experience and tender knowledge, labor management, material management, equipment management, subcontractor management, and construction delays. All right. So, let me just ask you a question. We'll start it off with the technical experience and tender knowledge kind of thing. Now, we have 2 sides to this. You're either building it, you're either the contractor, or you're the developer. Each one of these has different risks. You're either on this side or on this side. So from the project technical experience and tender knowledge kind of point, we have a few points. Let's start with if you're the developer. Now, if you're the developer, it's very simple. To a very large extent, you kind of just transfer this risk to your contractor. You transfer this risk to the people doing the building for you, all right? Now, but if you are transferring the risk and you do want to get as much out of this, like, how do we call it? Like the biggest bang for your buck. You need a qualified and experienced contractor. Now, qualified and experienced contractors usually have a history or a track record of actually delivering either on time or with the lowest costs possible. A lot of contractors right now are very into sustainability. They're very into value engineering, how to give you the best bang for your buck. Now, on the other hand, what if you're the contractor? If you're the contractor, it's a completely different thing. Now, what if you don't have the experience to do this kind of project? It sounds like it's a big deal, but it isn't. You just need the experience. Now, how do you get this experience? You hire the people with the experience. The same thing goes with the part for the bidding and the tender part. If you have someone with the right experience for it, you get the job. Now, bidding and tendering is a different kind of thing because it's kind of a dirty game. I don't know if any of you have actually seen this, but it is. You get to a certain point where, all right, I want this project and you want this project. You will undercut my bid substantially and start depending on variations and claims and kind of like, it's not the best kind of game. You need someone with this experience. Now, a lot of people will say, but hiring people with experience means increasing costs. Well, of course it does. But you hire one person with experience, increases cost this much, and avoid having to hire 10 people with experience to fix your problem 6 months ahead and start losing a lot of money. The right people in the right places get you where you need to go. All right. Up next, we've got labor management. Now, I'm going to talk about this from a very, like, my part. This is my experience, the construction side of it. All right? This is going to be a little technical, so try to follow with me. Now, labor productivity is a very big deal in cost control. Why is it a very big deal in cost control? Well, actually, these numbers are actual numbers in Egypt. They are old, a little old. I wasn't going to bring today's numbers with me, but they do actually solve our problem. Now, let me start talking about, for example, a steel worker or a steel fixer, someone who works with reinforcement rebar, someone who works with the metals that we need. Now, in Egypt, for example, a steel fixer can get paid 20 pounds an hour. All right? Not the biggest number, but it is an example. Now, the rates, when you're doing your budget, actually, when you're estimating your budget, that's supposed to be the very first part of cost control. You need to cost estimate correctly. All right? Now, during this cost estimates, during this budgeting, you do have initial productivity rates for all of your different laborers. All right? Now, this steel fixer should be able to, his output would be around 56 hours per ton. All right? So if it's 20 pounds per hour, 56 hours per ton, it ends up being 1,120 pounds per ton. Now, it takes him 56 hours for a ton. Now, let's say it took him 58 hours for a ton. It's over budget. You're losing 2 hours. You're losing 40 pounds. That's basically it per ton. On the other side, on the other hand, what if he ends up finishing it in like 54 hours? You're making money. You're saving money. You need to always be able to follow up on this kind of thing. Test for your productivity at least once a month. Now, if it overshoots, you analyze, you test, you find out why it happens, and you go forward with it. You fix it. You try to recuperate. You try to bring back all of this money. Now, on the other hand, like how can you make sure that productivity is still on the rise? Money. Bonuses. You grab this group of steel fixers and you go, all right, the money that you save me, you get a portion of as bonuses. This is a tried and tested way. It's worked every single time that I've ever had to manage a project. Now, moving on from labor management, I need to get quick, all right. We've got material management. Very quickly, material management, still the same thing. Everything starts at the same place. Your budget, when you're estimating your budget, you need to make sure that this budget is on point, it's accurate. But when you're budgeting for material, you need to make sure that you have a waste percentage in there. You know it's going to happen. Human error. A lot of these projects end up losing a lot just because of the material waste. Let's use something for example, concrete. There's always concrete waste. There's never no concrete waste. Now, an average waste percent for concrete is actually 3 to 5% internationally, depending on how well you know how to handle this. The right way to deal with this is, so basically you start off with a budget estimation, and then you need to periodically calculate wastes. Basically actual quantities versus the planned quantities. What are we doing? How far are we ahead? How much concrete have I used? How much did I actually build? It's a concept called the earned value. Hopefully one day I'll be able to actually talk with some of you about it. But moving forward, you analyze this waste. If something goes above the waste percentage that you have in budget, you start testing for it. You analyze it, you figure out why it's happening, and you recuperate. It's the same cycle in everything for cost control. Equipment management. This was actually kind of cool. There's a lot of equipment in cost control. One of the ways we always handled equipment management to kind of just control it was actually doing a utilization kind of thing. You want to know how much you're actually using this piece of equipment. For example, so basically, actually, let's start from here. You got the active time, you divide it by the active time, plus the standby time, which is all of the time that your equipment is on your field. And you got the percentage. Now, let's say you have, for example, 2 forklifts. These 2 forklifts ended up with a utilization of each 50%. Do we need 2 forklifts? See, you can do that, but it's not always that easy. It depends on your open work front. Maybe you're working on 3 separate buildings at the same time. But what if you're not? If you're not, and it's just one building, if your work front is just tiny, this kind of thing will help. Now, the problem with this kind of thing, this time formula, is it doesn't work for all equipment. Things like cranes, for example, tower cranes, these kind of things end up, well, how do I explain this? The equipment utilization thing is they usually use hour gauges. An hour gauge is attached to a piece of equipment. This hour gauge ends up kind of just giving you the hour, how many hours this equipment has been working. It's usually connected to the dynamo. It's not connected to the contact, or it's just electricity keeps counting. Now, that problem doesn't work for tower cranes and stuff like that, because some of these equipment end up, well, they lift the material, and then they just idle. It doesn't need to be turned on, because we just want this thing to stay here. On the other hand, something like a forklift, for example, no. As long as it's on, it's working. If it's off, it's not. We're done, all right? So, next, subcontractor management. This is very simple. It's just you need the qualified subcontractors. But next to that, this is the important part, contractual penalties and back-to-back agreements. If you're a contractor, you have a contract with your developer. This developer does apply a lot of penalties and rules and regulations to you. Whenever you're signing a new contract with a subcontractor, you have to transfer these risks over. Basically, if the subcontractor does something wrong, if he breaks something, if they end up damaging something, if they give you something with bad quality, Of course, it could run you some, like, it could lead to cost overrun because there's a cost of rework. You have to redo this kind of stuff. But if you have the right contract, the subcontractor is obligated to cover these costs, whatever they are, including the project delay costs. Because if this kind of delays your project, you still have to pay overheads, you still have to pay salaries, you still have to pay a lot of things. These are just constant costs. You end up just kind of, all right, I guess we're doing a claim. We're just going to develop a claim, I'll just submit it, and we'll figure out where to go from there. But if they carry this risk, if it's back to back, then it's not on you. They cover your costs. Now, last but not least, let's talk about construction delays. Construction delays, it's a massive problem. You have two kinds of construction delays. It's either your fault or it's not. It's either I did this, something I did didn't work, or something else didn't work. Now, the problem with if it's something I did that didn't work, yeah, that's usually a big problem. You need to analyze this, you need to mitigate this delay, you need to have a mitigation plan. You usually work hand in hand with your project controls department, with your planning department, and you implement the most cost-effective plan possible. You try to find shortcuts, you try to find value engineering. How can I fix this with the least amount of material, with the least amount of money? But of course, when you're budgeting a project at the very beginning, you do add a contingency for this kind of thing, mistakes that you can't fix. Now, this contingency budget it differs from one place to another. All of the companies that I've worked for have had contingencies that range from 5 to 10% of the value of the entire project. On the other hand, if the delay is due to external causes, like the subcontractors, like, let's say, the weather. We'll talk about, for example, the political landscape, COVID, that kind of thing. It's very simple. The contracts and claims teams, they do actually mitigate the time and cost risks incurred. They usually utilize the contract terms. Companies I've worked for have had dedicated departments, such as forensic analysis departments, that analyzes specifically every point and every minute of this delay and presents the right claim. Now, to conclude cost control is something that we all need to worry about. Now, if you looked at some of the examples that I gave, all of these examples were European. Why were they European? Why didn't I pick examples from all around the world? It's very simple, because there is a general underlying wrong impression that this is a problem for second and third world countries only. That this is a problem for what some people call less experienced or the up-and-coming markets. It's not. It's something we all need to take care of. We all need to actually always keep mindful of. And actually, we don't have that much more time. So I'd like to open the door for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Please.
That's a very wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Close to my heart. I face it every day. I'm from India. We are one of the largest construction companies there. There is a lot of speculations and a lot of assumptions while we do a costing because of all kind of sketchy details that we have at a costing time.
Of course.
And when we move into construction stage, details are there. So the fight becomes, is it a cost overrun or an escalation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So, while you are at a estimation time, we are having all sketchy details.
I know that part, sure.
So the costing is based on a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, data that's already there, sure.
Yeah. And while I'm executing it, I have got all the details, and the cost control team has now greater details to do a second costing of the project, which is more to the reality, which is called cost to the company at the end of the project.
I'm really sorry, but I keep not catching the end of that question. I can't, like, I just
Okay,
can't understand.
while we estimate, there is one project detail, costing detail. While you are doing an estimation,
Do you mind if I actually just step closer to you so I can actually? Sure.
so there's one thing called cost estimation.
Yes, of course.
All assumptions.
Yes, of course.
There is another thing, cost control, when I have all the details.
Of course.
How do I bridge this gap?
Of course.
Whether we call it cost overrun or we call it escalation.
Of course. So how do we bridge the gap between cost estimation and cost control? All right. Cost control is when you do have all of the data. I understand that completely. Okay. Cost estimation, when you estimate a cost to begin with, when you're starting budgeting at the very beginning, you have multiple different methods of estimating. All right? All of them have different accuracies, these different methods. For example, one of the methods that a lot of the construction companies now use is basically, all right, so this is the project we're doing. We did this project that's pretty similar before. Let's use these same rates and let's use these same assumptions and build the budget based on that. Basically, previous information that we have. The problem with this kind of estimate is we're talking about a percentage of error that's anywhere between 15 to 20%. So you make allowances for that, like I said. Now, the part for escalation, there's an escalation equation. It's that easy. It's actually something that you evaluate, you calculate, and you put it into the budget. But you add the escalation first to your budget, and then you add a contingency to your entire budget, including the escalation. This contingency can cover a lot of this, we'll call it an error, all right? Now, the best kind that you can do when it comes to estimating is just the most accurate. For example, it's this much material, which costs this much. This much material needs, for example, like I used the metal worker part. We need to work on 100 tons. Each ton is going to take 10 hours. So it's 1,000 tons. And this person takes 20 pounds per hour. So it's a very specific kind of calculation where you use it based on all of the quantities and all of the results that you've had. The problem with this kind of thing is that a lot of these rates that I'm talking about, they're not readily available online. If you're a company with a lot of experience and a lot of projects before, you have a wealth of data that you can pull from and develop your own rates. You know what works for you, you know what works for your country, because workers everywhere don't have the same rates. You can't take the rates from the UK, for example, and try to apply them. Well, you can, but it's not the best thing. But and try to apply them to where you are, because it's not the same level. It might not be the same level of education. It might not be the same level of skillfulness. So it might take a little bit longer. I hope that does answer some of your question. Thank you so much.
I appreciate your presentation, very good. I have a question to you regarding the cost escalation, what you're talking about it. You have given some examples of parliament building and all. There's a 2x, 2.5x, 2.6x you are giving. What is the duration of that project? Always cost overruns because of the long term. Because cost escalation cannot be 2x in a year project or 2 years project. The project must have been delayed abnormally. I mean, what I mean to say. Otherwise, we cannot do the business with such type of escalations. We have a margin of 10%, 20%. Anything beyond that, if you're going to multiply, we can't do the business.
You're absolutely right. This is the problem with escalation in projects. Now, a project like the Grand Egyptian Museum, for example, it's been in construction for 10 years. Can you do an escalation equation for 10 years?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Can you do an escalation for 10 years? No, of course you can't. It's very difficult, which is why you need to rebudget. Now, this is something that I always like to do. When I'm managing my own projects, I tend to reforecast my project at least once quarterly. Now, depending on this forecast, I can readjust the budget, move things around if I need to, and maybe actually increase my budget by using all of my contracts and my abilities and all of the data that I have. But there's no clear-cut way, like specific clear-cut way where you can just decide for sure that this is what we're doing. Like for sure, this money is going to cover this project. You can't do it over long years. But if, for example, you have a project and this project, its duration is 2 years. A lot of the projects that we work on in Egypt have a duration of, well, an initial duration of around 2 years. 2 years is very budgetable. 2 years, you can check for escalation within 2 years, that kind of thing. So, like I said, not everything works for every case. You're absolutely right. Some projects will go overboard. A project that's supposed to take 4 years and ends up taking 10 is not a project that you can really save anymore. You can just try to keep costs as low as possible. So I hope that answers.
So we can't even take the examples of the projects which have been delayed abnormally. Let us talk about the projects which are normally, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years maximum of duration. Normally in India, the escalation will be around 7 to 10% max.
Yep, that's
Maximum
the right
of that.
You're absolutely right.
Then normally we work with the profits of 10%, 15%, maximum of 20%. If the project cost goes beyond that, we can't do the business at all. So when you are given the examples of, 2x, 2.6x, there are, must be real examples. What you are given, data is a perfect data.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question itself at the very end?
The cost.
The reverb here is so high, I can just hear echoes.
The cost overrun.
Yes.
It cannot be 2x, 2.6x for any developer. If I am doing a project, I have a margin of 10%, 20% max. If it is beyond that, project won't work.
Which is exactly what I said. You get to a certain point, and some projects you just can't save. It's just a loss. You need to keep losses to a minimum.
So much escalation will not be there. For cost overrun, so much will not be there. What I'm talking about it. 2x, 1.6x and all. Maybe it is a percentage. You're giving practical examples of some live data you must be giving. Those projects, what I'm talking, it may be delayed abnormally, what I'm talking, or some emergency like COVID situation.
Actually, if you'd like, I have all of the data of why this happened, and I could share with you all of the. I could share all of this data. If you could give me your card afterwards, I will send you all of this research data, and I have all of the reasons, and all of these reasons actually add to cost overrun. Sure thing, of course. Anyone else? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. We're done? Okay. I guess we don't have time for more questions, but I will be available outside if anyone wants to have any kind of discussion with me. Thank you so much for your time.